So, Amy.
Zachary.
Avery.
Yeah.
Avery?
Yeah. My sinuses are clogged. Don't look at me like that. It's allergy season.
It is allergy season.
Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds has announced that she's no longer running for re-election. And I think there's a lot of people, Baron Bird, Ashley Hinson, Zach Nunn, any of them, right? They're all wondering, could it be me? Could I be the one?
Brad Sherman.
But I'm Brad Sherman, R.I.P. His campaign, not him, obviously. I want to know, though, for the two of y'all, what Kim Reynolds ought to be doing for her retirement.
Go to Disneyland?
Open up a daycare center.
These are very constructive and nice.
I think Kim Reynolds should have a small role in the next season of The White Lotus.
Kind of a Coolidge type. Give me where would it be set, and then who would you play?
I actually have thought about this a lot. I personally would like it to be set at a ski resort, and I would like because you know how each season has like certain themes. Like the first season is like mostly class, second season is like romantic relationships and adultery, third season is spirituality. I would love it if the fourth season was about spectacle and then set at like a ski resort, and then you have a group of like people on like a work retreat and like some political figures and
Governor Kim Reynolds.
And Governor Kim Reynolds. She could be like you know, like Mike White always has like old co-stars from like Survivor on it.
I love that.
I think Kim Reynolds should like be somewhere in there.
I actually would lean more into the reality TV of it all.
Yeah.
And I would have, of course, Governor Kim Reynolds. I would have her on the new season of Love Island UK.
A new bombshell has entered the villa.
Welcome to Cornhole Champions, a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line, where we throw bags at the state's biggest stories. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. It's Wednesday, and today I'm joined by Iowa Starting Line's Amy Rivers and Avery Staker. This week, we're diving deep into conversations with four candidates, all of whom are in conversation to take on US Senator Joni Ernst. This episode, we're talking antitrust, we're talking campaign finance reform, but most of all, we're talking about the ideas that are in the space and the people trying to get them into the mainstream. Also, hear from an upstart candidate from Knoxville, Iowa, who's launching his campaign for US Senate here on the podcast. He says he's got something new for Democrats to chew on. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. Thanks for listening to Cornhole Champions. This is a really special episode because we're all together.
We're in your house.
We're together in person.
Des Moines, checking out the sights, the sounds in Des Moines, the beautiful weather. But most of all, we've been recording a ton of interviews. Avery and I spent like 3-4 hours yesterday getting a bunch of candidates on film. This episode, we're focused purely on the U.S. Senate race in 2026. Currently, the seat is held by U.S. Senator Joni Ernst. And we've got four Democrats, some announced, some not, who are I'm interested in sharing kind of their where they're at in the thought process and what they think they bring to this conversation that maybe others don't. Back in 2017, Iowa's Starting Line predicted a new generation of Democratic leaders would reshape Iowa politics. The party was on the ropes then as it is now, but what's changed is the crop of ideas circulating in Democratic circles. For our cornhole matchup this week, I wanted to explore what this future might look like, with Senator Joni Ernst facing pressure from the right after her hesitation on the Pete Hegseth's nomination. Democrats see a pretty large opening with the gubernatorial race that I'm sure everybody's reading about. There's going to be a ton of money impacting down ballot races. As high as the US Sen, but also all the way down to your local state races. We sat down with four candidates who represent different identities and approaches to pull the party forward. A critical moment for Iowa Democrats trying to reclaim their competitive edge in this increasingly Republican state. Amy, have you been paying much attention to like the kind of road towards 2026?
Senate-wise, no. I think the more interesting one is the governor's race, maybe. I don't know. Really. Wait, I want to ask, what do you consider like the higher office? Governor or Senate?
That's a really good question. The way I kind of think about it is, at any given, depending on the state, depending on the party, depending on the office, the kind of like title of the leader of the party, right, is, it can change from state to state. In a state like Iowa, where Democrats have a super minority in the legislature, where there's only one statewide Democrat, right? Yeah, I mean, it can be a little tough to say kind of where leadership in the party lies, right? Like, it's very clear from the Republican side that Governor Kim Reynolds has been absolutely the leader of this party, right? But on Democrats, it's a little more difficult, right? You got people like Minority Leader Converst in the Iowa House, right? You got folks like Janice Weinger in the Senate. Obviously, the one statewide Democrat we have is State Auditor Rob Sand, right? But like in terms of like one definitive voice, right? I don't know that you could say that there's like one person that is kind of that leader of the party. But as as Democrats look to put forward a candidate for this office, U.S. Senate becomes obviously like a place where you would look for a future for the party. If it were to happen anywhere, why wouldn't it happen from an office like that?
Yeah, I think you would see a larger primary for that Senate seat then, especially if you're saying Rob Sand is definitely going to run for governor, which I think the smart money is on. Maybe they don't want to challenge that. Maybe he's got enough of a war chest built up right now, and I think that he does, that other Democrats don't want to jump into that race. But I think Joni Ernst seat then starts looking really palatable for you. So then you might see a Zach Wahls jump in there. You might see an Austin Bates jump in there. You might see the other ones that you mentioned. So that could be interesting.
These conversations aren't just about who might challenge Ernst. They're about the future direction of Iowa politics itself. 4 candidates, 4 visions, 1 Senate seat at stake. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. We had a great episode planned for you. I had convinced state senator Zach Wahls, representing parts of Johnson County, Coralville, North Liberty, to talk about the math that he was kind of working his way through as he sets up for potentially a state Senate run against U.S. Senator Joni Ernst. Reporters aren't normally allowed on the Senate floor, but there I was, tripod set up, 30 minutes in, and I go to see what great work we were ready to do, and black screen of death, nothing got recorded. Actually, sorry,
18 seconds.
18 seconds.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
I like to think it was a better 18 seconds.
You didn't show me the footage.
It was hard to say. Here we are. We're at where this is Cornhole Champions' very first bait shop edition. We're recording here because Zach Wahls was kind enough to let me eat crow in public and do a second version, a second try.
And I'm here because I needed to eat dinner, and I was like, "Don't worry, I'll talk to you, and then I'll go eat." We did the interview. It was in the can, literally.
So in the spirit of transparency, in the spirit of trying to be our best selves, we're trying new things here. And cheers to a second try at this podcast. Why does it take so long for a candidate to declare in a race like this?
Well, look, a statewide campaign is a really major undertaking.
Total.
And it involves not just the candidate, but the candidate's family, your close friends and supporters, people who you might have relationships with across the state. And so honestly, a lot of what is happening during this period is spending time on the phone. It is, my wife and I talking through what would a schedule look like where you have enough hours in the day that are dedicated to the campaign that you can run a credible 99 county campaign. And to me, that is a prerequisite, right? Because if you can't be in all 99 counties, then it's not worth doing.
Right. And that scale's huge.
It is. Iowa's a large state.
Yeah.
We're not California or Texas, but 99 counties is a lot of counties. And I think one of the biggest challenges for the Democratic Party is that we have lost a lot of support in many of those more rural counties. I think a lot of rural counties in Iowa are facing really significant challenges. They feel like the Democratic Party is not focused on them and the challenges that they're facing, and that has to change. And the only way that you can change that is by showing up, listening, and trying to come up with solutions and solutions to problems that are resonant in those areas. And so there's a lot of trying to figure out the logistics, right, of that, from a family perspective, right? Like how many bedtimes in a week am I comfortable missing?
Right.
Right. Understanding there's going to be a lot of travel. There's going to be an enormous amount of time that is spent campaigning, going to events, on the phone, listening to people, talking with people, and how, literally, just what is the calendar going to look like, right? You have to kind of start with election day 2026, because I think we'll have a competitive and positive primary race. But then you gotta assume, right, for planning purposes, that you're gonna go all the way the distance. You gotta work backwards from like November 2026, like when can I go see my in-laws, right? Like, when can my wife and I plan to go take some vacation that's just like us time, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and so that's what a lot of this phase of things is about now. But look, it's helpful to have your name out there, so folks are thinking about, Senator Wahls is thinking about running. What do I think about that? Oh, I think that's a good idea. Right. Maybe I'll reach out to Zach and let him know I want to help out. Oh, Josh Turek is thinking about running. I really like Josh. How to help out with his campaign? JD, anyone else who gets in. And so you're kind of trying to get your name out there and then get feedback from that. Like that's a big part for me.
If you're trying to describe like the thesis of your candidacy, right? I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what's at the center of the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, look, I think the fundamental problem is an absence of leadership. You think about the problems that are facing our state, and you have in Iowa at this moment, 48th in personal income, 49th in GDP, number one in fastest growing cancer rates, right? That's a huge problem. When you think about where does that absence of leadership come from, right? Why aren't leaders stepping in to solve those problems and tackle those problems? And I think that there's a bunch of reasons for that. I think the influence of money in our politics is a really big part of it. I think you have politicians like Senator Ernst who are more focused on kind of their political status within their own party than on actually doing the work of solving problems. But it's not just Senator Ernst, right? I mean, you look at what is happening in our state, and I think it's hard to blame it on any one person. But when you don't have somebody who's stepping up to lead in tackling those problems, that is a failure of leadership at an enormous number of levels. I think with Senator Ernst in particular, I was certainly my view that she's like kind of like gone Washington, right? I mean, she's a farm girl from Red Oak who was a state senator, ran in 2014 to make him squeal. I think she had a lot of the right intentions, right? She pledged when she was in the Republican primary that she'd only serve 2 terms. But now 12 years later, like, what does she have to show for it aside from a broken promise as she's gearing up to run for a 3rd time? Right. Iowa, like I just said, 48th in personal income, 49th in GDP, number 1 in cancer rates. And like, that is a failure of leadership. And it's clear that the people who are in power right now are not stepping up to solve the problems that are facing our state. And so I would put, the cancer issue, every Iowan knows somebody who has been affected by cancer. I have colleagues in the state Senate right now who are battling cancer. Right. One of the co-chairs of my campaign committee from when I first ran has successfully beaten back breast cancer for now, but that's obviously a thing that you worry about for the rest of your life. And like, to me, that's not acceptable. And Iowa deserves better.
Solving our cancer problem. Yeah, I mean, even just not, it's based on the previous cancer report, right? It seemed like Iowa was one of the few places where this was growing.
Correct,
right?
That's right. So do something, right? Do something about it. And I think, to me, you see, in fact, the like kind of opposite of leadership in some respects in Iowa. In the state Senate just a few weeks ago, we voted on a bill that prevents Iowans from being able to sue Bayer Monsanto is the kind of the biggest advocate around this. And they basically changed the law so Iowans don't have recourse in the courts if, and that has been an effective way to seek relief. And like, that's a very complicated issue in a lot of respects because, Roundup is an important product that a lot of farmers use. But I think the more fundamental problem is like, our farmers feel like they have to use chemicals that have been linked to cancer in order to be competitive in the global marketplace. Again, you need leaders who are going to say that's a problem and we need to do something about it, because the fact that all of us, not just the people who are spraying those chemicals, are facing these elevated cancer rates is something that our state should not find to be an acceptable part of the status quo.
And you've been in the Senate for how many years have you been in the Senate?
My 7th legislative session. So yeah, no, I mean, and that entire time I have been the youngest member of the Iowa Senate.
Walk me through how your kind of diagnosis of the issue has changed in that time, right? Like
like how I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, like what's that look like for you?
Well, so when I first ran in 2018, I think there were a lot of people who were focused on like the influence of money in politics. Right. Citizens United, still relatively fresh, even though it is like for several years before that at that point. Iowa in some respects has some okay campaign finance laws and also some like wild campaign finance laws. So like, for example, a lot of your viewers might be surprised to learn that Iowa is one of like a handful of states that has no limits on campaign contribution. So if somebody wants to write you a $10 million check, they can write you a $10 million check, right? The flip side of that is Iowa also does not allow corporations to contribute to political spending. So Warren Buffett could write a $10 million check. Mid-American Energy could not. There's an enormous amount of money that gets spent on lobbying. You know, when I first was running, I did not really understand the influence of the lobby in terms of how they shape legislation. I mean, they literally will write bills that then get handed to legislators. And look, a lot of these bills are not particularly controversial. They're like little technical fixes to this problem or that problem in law. And then you get other ones like the Bayer-Monsanto bill where like, yeah, no, actually it's a very influential piece of legislation that's going to have a huge impact on people. Yeah. There's also been this rise. It was true, I think, in 2017 when I first ran, but I think it's more true today of like these this model legislation. So ALEC is a very famous example of this, but another...
Maybe say a little bit about what...
So ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Right. Basically what they do is they draft legislation that is sponsored by like the members, which are largely corporate organizations of ALEC. And then they like fax that out, basically. The fax is like, it's like an old email thing. You know, I don't know if they literally use faxes, but you know, they send it out, right?
Right.
But there's others too, right? I mean, so one example of that was the Heritage Foundation, which was like kind of like a mini scandal with a guy who's now our state treasurer a couple of years ago about how like they basically wrote an election bill and then took credit for it. And then more recently, this organization called the Cicero Institute, there was this kind of big to-do around a bill that would have criminalized homelessness. Totally. That even Republicans are like, whoa, buddy, you know, it's a little much for us.
Yeah.
And so I think I did not fully appreciate that part of it. But I think ultimately it is just like, and then maybe the last thing I'll say on this is just the literal structure. This is a little wonky, but like the literal structure of politics. So, you know, a lot of people know who Chuck Schumer is, right? The Senate leader for the Democrats in Washington. And here in Iowa, we have like a very similar structure. You know, you mentioned McConnell for a long time. The new guy's named John Thune on the Republican side in DC. But you have a similar structure here. You have Jack Whitford, who's been the Republican majority leader the entire time I've been in the Senate. And now the leader is Janice Weiner. And, you know, those positions are democratically elected, lowercase d, democratically elected by the people who make up the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus. But then that leader wields an enormous amount of influence. It is procedurally, because they are the first person who's recognized they can call up bills to the calendar, so they can unilaterally kill legislation or basically guarantee that it's on the fast track. And you've seen that play out in a multitude of ways. But the concentration of that amount of power in a single person, who then is also at the same time responsible for raising the money to fund the campaigns, right? You can see where that influence can be very, very powerful on the campaign side. And so I think that's part of where I think the American people feel like there has been this loss of trust in government. We talked a little bit in round one about some of the ways to try and clean that up on the government side, but I think it's very clear too that we need to clean that up on the campaign side as well.
One of the challenges that I think any Democrat, particularly in the Iowa legislature, faces is that if they have a great idea, right? If they have something that would help out, help Iowans in their district, they're not just required to like kind of do the statesman work of trying to build consensus, but they are often asked to like try to find a Republican interlocutor who's willing to take their bill, put their name on it, and get it past the post, right? Had I not been following the session this year, I would have, it would be very easy for me to think that Iowa State Democrats have just been up to not a damn thing, right? Yeah. For so many reasons, right? But particularly, I think one of the challenges is that because state Iowa Democrats are in such a deep minority in the legislature, unless it has like a pretty large Republican sponsor, it's really tough to move it past the post. And I wonder, like, as you're thinking about the future of Iowa Democrats, as you're thinking about the kind of way forward for the ideas that this party is trying to represent, how do you begin talking about the work of ideas when right now, at least, right, power seems to ignore them?
Well, so I think what you just said is something that, frankly, a lot of people totally understand in terms of if a Democrat I think some people assume that if a Democrat introduces a bill that it gets a vote, right?
Right.
And sometimes it's not even the case that if you introduce an amendment that the amendment gets a vote. So just last week, there was a bill that the Republican majority was running. It had to do with inspections of nursing homes.
Right.
And so Democrats introduced 3 amendments that were modeled off bills that we had introduced earlier this year that would provide additional oversight for nursing homes. And the Republicans didn't even allow us to vote on those. And they challenged whether or not these amendments were germane to the bill, when I think obviously they were, because that's what the bill was literally dealing with. And when I got the Republican senator up who had challenged the germaneness, I asked her to yield and answer my questions. I asked her, so why did you challenge the germaneness of these amendments? And she didn't even have an answer other than this is just how we do things. Yeah. And it's such a revealing answer in so many ways that there's this focus on kind of partisanship that is like getting in the way of actually solving problems. And I think that is itself like an enormous part of the frustration that a lot of Democrats feel. Believe it or not, it's actually worse in the Senate than it is in the House. In the House, there are at least some bills that if a Democrat has their name on an amendment or on a bill, they can actually get through. The partisanship is worse in the Senate for reasons that I have to confess I'm not sure I fully understand. And so for a bill to have any opportunity of passing at all, I mean, shoot, I was pretty glad when I got a bill that had my name on it out of committee, let alone to the floor. And look, I have had the opportunity to be collaborative on pieces of legislation that have come forward and to have input. And you do that by trying to build relationships with your Republican colleagues, which is, it's difficult and it takes a lot of work to do, but it's always, I think, worth doing in the spirit of trying to be an effective legislator. It's a big part of the job. But there's a culture of partisanship. And I think there's also, although hopefully this will change now, there has been a real culture of fear around, in particular, the governor and how she has used the power of her office to retaliate against perceived political opponents. So
Can you describe the voucher?
yeah, so it's exactly, so it's exactly where I was going. The governor for years have been trying to push this bill to privatize Iowa public education through this voucher program. And she was willing to primary members of her own party who spoke out against it. And so a lot of Republicans, rather than fight the fight and stand up to the governor, either rolled, and the handful who did have the courage to stand up had these very well-funded primary challenges. And so kind of created this fear and this, in some respects, this clout that the governor had that if you cross me, I'm going to get you. Right. And look, a lot of people were in the Republican Party were really afraid of that. And so there's this, this culture of partisan, this culture of fear. And I think it is those two things together that have prevented action on these problems. And that's how you get to a place where Iowa has 48th in income, 49th in GDP, #1 in cancer, where our public schools have slipped in the rankings from being like the envy of the country, best in the US, to being worse than like Nebraska and even Illinois, right?
Even Nebraska.
Well, look, you have to have standards. And I say that with all due respect to my friends from the Cornhusker State, but like, it's just, when I was growing up, this was like a thing that Terry Branstad used to say, right? That Iowa was like a state of minds.
Yeah.
And we have just gotten away from that. And I think, look, nobody moves to Iowa for the weather, right?
What the long winters and falls?
My wife's from Sydney, Australia originally. When her first winter here, Fahrenheit and Celsius converged at -43 or whatever the number is. She was like,
experience.
I have no idea what I'm doing here, right? But people, if you leave Iowa for college or for a job and you're thinking about, do I want to move home because I want to be closer to family? A huge part of what you're thinking about is like, can my kids get a great public school education without me having to shell out money for private school tuition or whatever? And I think, unfortunately, you have just seen, for a multitude of reasons, including underinvestment, Iowa schools have gone from being national leaders to being middle of the pack and down the rankings in the Midwest. And I think it just makes it really hard for us to compete in trying to bring young-ish, middle-aged-ish Iowans back home after they're done seeing the world and starting careers and families.
case that you've been trying to make to folks has been that has been a question of trust, right? The extent to which we can trust our government. I mean, what can we do to begin? What are some policies we can pursue to begin making, to encouraging folks to like rebuild some of that trust, right? When the lack of trust is so palpable, is so germane. How do you think about it?
Yeah. So here's part of the problem, right? If you poll the American people, the vast majority of Americans agree that like we need to get money out of politics, overturn Citizens United, and then so the American people are like screaming that at the top of their lungs. There are not a ton of like 80-20, 90-10 issues in politics. This is one of them.
I would love to actually meet the like. I actually really want more money in my politics.
Well,
right?
I mean, look, I think there's a
Maybe the billionaires have it right.
there's a conversation to be had about like what does community organizing look like and how do you sustain and fund that in an ongoing way, right? But I don't think that there's anybody who looks at our political system and says, you know what, I really wish there were more TV ads on the television in September and October when I'm trying to watch the football game.
Exactly. They're very entertaining.
You know, and I would put myself in that category, by the way, of like, not something I look forward to, right? That being said, people have this very strong view about, we think that there's too much money in politics, we want to get money out of politics, and then nothing changes, right? Citizens United is still the law of the land. You've got these super PACs accepting unlimited amounts of contributions and all of that. And then like people wonder, well, gosh, why does the public not trust the government? It's like, well, they're telling you overwhelmingly, we want this thing to change and nothing is happening, right? Term limits are another good example of that, right? Term limits are something where the vast majority of people are like, we think that there should be term limits for these offices, and then nothing changes. People are like, oh, well, why isn't there trust in government, right? There is an enormous amount of self-dealing on trading on inside information in Congress. We know this is a thing. It's both parties. This is not exclusively a Republican or Democrat issue. And again, it's something that the vast majority of Americans do not want their members of Congress in the House or the Senate to be trading on this information, and yet it happens.
Yeah.
And then we wonder, like, why don't people trust government? And look, I'm a Democrat in large part because I believe in the power of government at its best to do things that, like with Social Security and Medicare, make it possible for people who have worked hard and played by the rules their entire career to retire with security and dignity and to have access to the healthcare that they need. I believe that government can do really important things when it is being focused and directed in the right way. And if you don't have trust in government, then it's so much harder to do those things. But it's clear that there is like a fundamental problem at the heart of the decline in trust. And until we have elected leaders who are willing to confront that head on, I don't think that problem is going to get any better, because the first step in solving a problem is identifying the problem, then you have to diagnose the problem, and then you have to work the problem. And so as I'm trying to understand why his trust in government declined, my diagnosis is that people perceive their elected officials to be engaged in self-dealing and not concerned about the people who they represent. And so how do you solve that? Well, we need to start going after the sources that are causing the distrust in that. And so to me, it seems straightforward and obvious, but I think to a lot of people, it's, obviously it's not.
State Senator Zach Wahls represents Coralville, North Liberty, and parts of Johnson County. Zach, thanks for doing this for a second time.
My pleasure.
Cheers. Zach?
Amy.
Avery.
So what y'all think of Zach Wahls?
I really like the things that he was saying about needing better leadership. And he's talking specifically about the fact that Republicans have led us down this road, and that's the reason why we're 49th and 48th as the fastest growing cancer rate, or whatever. But I think another larger point is that there needs to be a Democratic leadership that we haven't really seen yet. And I think when that starts to happen, when you start to see these Democratic leaders talk about these issues as their endpoint. So like not only just we're the opposition party, but like what are we standing for? I think that's also what people are calling for. And so yeah, his candidacy is very interesting to me if he indeed decides to run.
Yeah. I like that he was, I mean, speaking to the leadership of it all, I like that the way that he spoke about kind of the current Democratic Party's like efforts in that. It like the you can't like plan the cult of personality that like requires to have like a really interesting like political leader that like draws people to them. You can't necessarily like set that up. It kind of just happens. Like, yeah, there has to be kind of a perfect storm of like personality and situation and you know, public perception that works in their favor. And but I do like that they're not just like trying to rely on, you know, like they're not just sitting around waiting around and being like, somebody has to come do it. Like they're actually putting in a lot of effort into understanding what they've done wrong in the past and how they can move forward from that and fix mistakes. And I think that's really smart. I think that is a testament to how hard it seems that they're trying to, you know, get us back to a better place.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like anytime we are thinking out loud about the challenge of leadership, the challenge of what boils down to a vision for what it means to bring this party, out of a kind of really low point generationally. We have to be talking about what is the vision. One, it's the metaphor about the story about when the dog, what happens when the dog catches the mail truck, right? What does the dog do? I think that the thing that we all need to be thinking a lot about right now is if we're feeling out of power, what would it mean to be in power? What is that vision for a better future? What is that? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Does that look like universal K through 12 lunch?
Yeah.
Does- You're listening to Cornhole Champions. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. Next in our lineup of legislators considering a run against Senator Ernst is a candidate who's no stranger to tough elections. State Representative J.D. Scholten splits his time between lawmaking and pitching professionally for the Sioux City Explorers before winning his House seat. He nearly unseated Congressman Steve King in 2018, running a campaign that got national attention. Today, he's focused on America's monopoly problem through his blog, You're Probably Getting Screwed, and his We the People rallies, arguing that billionaires have hijacked our government. He joins us to weigh in on whether or not he'll be entering the Senate race. Hello, JD.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. So I want to start by naming the problem.
Yeah.
Right? How do you explain what's gone wrong in the state and where Iowans can feel it?
100% Iowa is agriculture.
Okay.
And so for decades, we've been in a agriculture crisis. We have a few multinational corporations controlling what's happening on farms. You have the input side, you have fertilizer and seed prices. Only a handful of corporations control those. And then on the other side, you have markets, which, again, only a few multinational corporations control those. So they're really squeezing the farmer. Consolidation, when you have policies out of DC, get bigger, get off the farm. And so here we are. You see the reason why eggs are so expensive, because we are concentrated. You look at us compared to Canada, Canada's not having an egg situation right now. We are. And it's because it's these get bigger, get off the farm policies, and we're starting to get to a very dangerous point where we're becoming serfs on the land, and it's reminiscent to the first Gilded Age. And so I firmly believe we are in the second Gilded Age, in the fact that we have just a handful of people and a handful of corporations having way too much power in this country.
Speak a little bit more to, you mentioned egg prices as being a place where Iowans can see kind of what the kind of wages of industry consolidation, what that looks like. But paint that picture for me a little bit.
Yes. So, in previous generations, there were multiple farms that would have eggs, or produce eggs, where now it's less farms, but massive. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a disease that goes through them and wipes out a whole flock, that's where we're at right now. And you see that with dairy. You have 18,000 head dairy farms in Texas and Southwest where there's hardly any water. That doesn't make much sense. So when there was a 18,000 head barn fire down in Texas, that disrupted the market because we're so concentrated. So for me, food security is national security. And that's something that we need to talk a lot more about. Regional food systems should be something that we should talk about. Soil health is what we should be talking about more. And to me, what I get really frustrated with like the Democratic Party, we're becoming more urban, and so we're losing the touch on how to talk about these things. And I think that's one of the things, having ran for the 4th district, which is the second most agriculture producing district in the country, I feel like I've gained a lot of experience on not only how to talk about it, but talk about it in a way that brings people in who are not necessarily Democrats.
You've centered kind of a political identity, your political identity, in fighting kind of corporate consolidation, fighting monopoly in the United States. And I wonder how that works as a cogent ideology, right? Given that, you know, so many, if you want to talk like the number of massive Fortune 500 companies that are based in places like Muscatine, when you think about the kind of way that ag land has just been passing hands into these larger and larger operations. You know, like, why is that the right kind of like frame for understanding the problems in Iowa? If you know, when in some ways Iowans are the ones that companies, at least if not people, benefit significantly from this consolidation.
Well, I would argue that what we're seeing initially in the first Gilded Age, it was Iowa that really took the anti-monopoly movement. Like the first antitrust law in the country was here in Iowa. And then you have the Farmers Holiday that happened just north of Sioux City. That was a major event in agriculture back in the day, and it was for farmers' rights. And so we have a long history. And so you look at just what happened during the pandemic. You had farmers being squeezed from these multinational corporations. You had workers being suppressed and worked in hard conditions. And then you have consumers paying the most they ever have. All the while, every one of those corporations had huge profits, and if not record or near record profits. And so what I see in the rural communities is an extraction of wealth in the majority in this, and it's in every sector too. So it's not just agriculture, but because we're so agriculture forward in this state, that's a huge part of it.
You're choosing to run, or considering a run for US Senate, right? Which is a tremendous, you know, the jurisdiction is tremendous, right, in terms of the kinds of questions that they're faced with, the kinds of challenges that they're faced with solving. I wonder why this is the seat you chose to kind of to begin applying some thinking towards.
You know, it's one of those things that at the beginning of the year, this wasn't even on my radar. I haven't been planning on this. Like, I'm not the type of politician that has always dreamed about doing this or that. I got involved because of my grandma on her deathbed said, "You got to take care of our farm." That led me to run for Congress. I thought I was just going to run one time and either you win or lose. But when you move the needle 24 points in a federal race, which is unheard of in these partisan times, we did something really special and got a lot of national attention for that. So then, but at the beginning of this year, I was not thinking about this. But then when the tariffs hit, it reminded me of, oh my goodness, these farms and farmers are just getting devastated, and they need a champion. And you look at what Senator Ernst has been doing, and she's not out there. She didn't even know the price of commodities in the debate against Teresa Greenfield in her last race. And like, that's a slap in the face to Iowans. And so that kind of started the wheel of, you know what, that I'm thinking about this, and we'll see where we go.
I wonder what you think of the kind of class of folks that have so far, maybe not thrown their hats in, but have said, you know, they're considering a run. How do you stand out in that field, given the names and talents right there in?
Yeah, we got a lot of talented people, and so I'm excited about that. I think for me, I'm the only one who's had federal experience, and very positive federal experience. I mean, again, who has moved the needle 24 points in a congressional district? I've outperformed the top of the ticket in every race, my 2 congressionals and my 2 state house races. I have to admit that the one house race, I didn't have an opponent, and Senator Harkin said it's proven how there's justice in this world because JD doesn't have an opponent after how hard he worked in the congressional campaigns. But yeah, for me, I'm a blueberry in a bowl of tomato soup. Being in Sioux City, I'm the only Democrat in 42 counties in Northwest and North Central Iowa. I know how to talk to people who are not Democrats and how to get them on board with what I'm about. And so that's what I bring to the table. And so I firmly believe that what we're seeing right now is similar to 2018. If you go out there and create a grassroots movement, I think you can do something special in this state. And that's what really intrigues me about this race.
What is a winning case that Democrats can make to that voter, right? That to that red soup, right? If because Iowa Democrats can't wrestle power away from Republicans if they don't begin making a case for two rural voters.
Oh, absolutely.
And I wonder what have you found to be effective as you're making that case to your neighbors?
I hammered fix, fight, and secure. Fix healthcare. I believe in universal healthcare, and I remember going on Chris Hayes' show in 2018, talking about universal healthcare, and he couldn't believe it. I go, but you look at my district, the congressional district, mostly farmers and small business owners. They don't have employer health insurance. Fight for an economy that works for everyone. Clearly, the billionaires and huge corporations we have an economic concentration in this state, or in this country. They're doing well. A lot of people are being left behind. A lot of Sioux City and Northwest Iowa has not bounced back since the 2008 economic crisis. And we got to figure out, what does it mean to have an economy that works for them? And then secure our democracy from the billionaires and the special interests that are dictating it. We have to overturn Citizens United, and we need to find a way that a billionaire can't just come into the race and drop millions of dollars and try to put their thumb on the scale.
Were you to make it through this primary in June 2026, I wonder how you think about, what is your case against Joni Ernst?
In putting feelers out there, I've talked to a lot of people who are not necessarily Democrats about this race, and they all say the same thing. They feel she's DC Joni now. She's not the Joni that was elected in 2014, I believe it was initially. I could be wrong on that. I can't remember.
We can check that. Yeah, I'm not sure either.
But that's the reality. Is a lot of people don't feel like she is what she used to be, and she doesn't come back to the state like she used to be. So I do think there's a vulnerability, but at the end of the day, for me, it's about fighting for the people of this state versus the billionaires and the special interests that are going to be donating to her campaign. We're going to be a grassroots, scrappy underdog campaign like we were in 2018. And if I were to do this, and I think that could really do some damage in this state in a positive way.
Doing damage in a positive way with J.D. Scholten, that'd be the title. To end it, give me one policy, one idea that you think that you want to see Congress enact. What's the policy that you get excited about, that you like to tell folks about?
I don't think we can do what we want in this country without getting some sort of campaign finance reform. That dictates everything. The reason why we don't have universal health care, despite being the wealthiest country in the world, is because there's a handful of people who invest in politicians nonstop. There's more. I think there's almost 2 lobbyists when it comes to health care per member of Congress, and that's just absolutely insane. And so all the things that I'm really passionate about, on the other side, you can see billionaires funding it. And so when I say, like, I'm taking on billionaires, that's the fight. You know, why are we so far behind in this state in so many different things? It's because nationally there are billionaires behind trying to hold us back. And I think, like, that's something that we haven't had or had a Democrat stand up enough to the past few cycles, and I would love to be that person.
J.D. Scholten is a state representative representing Sioux City. He's in his 2nd term representing his district. J.D., thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you guys think of J.D.?
I like that he's talking about issues to run on rather than issues to run against. I think, like, the same thing we talked about with Zach Wahls. Like, that is what Democrats need to be doing, because right now you're just going to go into rural areas and spaces and be like, we're opposed to everything Republicans are doing, and nobody knows what that means. If you tell them things like, we're going for universal health care. Does your health care suck? Because of course it does, especially in these rural places in Western Iowa that have been losing health care. You're gonna find backers. You're talking about economic pocketbook issues. He's talking about the price of eggs, but as it relates to the price of everything because of industry consolidation. And these are issues that, you know, somebody like Bernie Sanders and AOC are drawing huge crowds for this message. So I think that the time is, again, ripe for that sort of message. So Yeah, that's a good one.
I agree with that. I really like that. I mean, he specifically mentioned like regional food systems, but like any kind of like regional resource system, it feels like they're laying a groundwork on issues that are mostly focused on that, like with like rural healthcare and like making sure that every region of every state has access to the things that we need to survive. And I like that they're laying a groundwork on those kinds of things because then we start getting into a conversation of like how those things can be diversified to fit the areas that they're in and how we can like build resilience and sustainability within those like resource systems, not just in a sense of like environmental friendliness, but sustainability in a sense that like even when like shocks happen or if like natural disasters happen or if suddenly there's an influx of people moving somewhere or moving away from somewhere, that these regional resource systems are set up to withstand those kinds of things happening.
That's exactly what he was talking about with the Canada thing. They have those systems set up so that like when you have these gigantic egg operations, for example, that we have in Iowa, and you get bird flu and you have to kill 5 million chickens.
Egg or
Egg.
egg. I'm never sure when JD's saying egg or egg. It might be either. I'm never sure. It's either.
Yeah. When you have these large operations and you have to kill them all as per, the rules, the USDA rules when you find bird flu on a chicken farm, when you have those multiple chicken farms with much smaller flocks, you don't have as big of a shock.
Mm-hmm.
I love that point. One of the things that I think JD does a really good job in that interview doing is like setting a scene for like a superstructure, right? That all problems ultimately have a root in monopoly. They have a root in the billionaire class having more power than they ought to.
Yeah.
And I think anytime I love a big systems thinker, right? But that was a really it's a kind of theme that we'll see across some of these interviews.
Don't put your eggs in the same basket. Don't put all your eggs in the same. Oh, baby.
And on to the next interview. You're listening to Cornhole Champions. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. Next up is a Council Bluffs state legislator making waves with his proposals to reform disability supports. In the state of Iowa, State Representative Josh Turek is a two-time Paralympic gold medalist who overcame 21 surgeries at the age of 12 after being born with spina bifida. In 2022, he won his first race by just 6 votes and has since outperformed President Trump in his district by 13 points. Former Senator Tom Harkin, who introduced the Americans with Disabilities Act, has called Turek someone with, quote, all the qualities we need in a great leader. He joins us today as he explores a Senate bid. Hello, Josh.
Hello. Should we do this professional? Firm handshakes all around?
I'm into it. Firm handshakes all around. Council Bluffs is much more rugged and hilly than the rest of the state of Iowa. Do you think door knocking across the state will be a little bit easier in this House run?
Certainly can't get more difficult. Nearly every house on the east side of Council Bluffs has 10, 20, 30 stairs. Also, I would imagine in a statewide race, it'd be a whole lot less of individual door knocking and more in terms of like big public forums you would hope to be able to get in front of the maximum amount of people. You can't door knock 3.2 million people.
But a girl can dream. Can dream.
But nonetheless, yeah, I've already knocked the most hilly, difficult portion of the state and had a good outcome there. I think the rest of the state will be more manageable.
I want you, I'm begging now. Can you tell me the story? It was the first time we talked, everyone was kind of dealing with the post-November scaries. And you were this kind of rare bright spot, right? I think in the state of Iowa. Can you tell the story? You were talking about how like door knocking, kind of like the conversations you were having with folks at the top of the stairs at door. Can you tell a little bit about that story?
Yeah, it's obviously being in wheelchair is largely preventative to be able to get face to face with people, which is at least half of the calculus, right? It's just doors and fundraising.
There's not yet a drone.
No drone that allows you to do it. So I mean, it made me way less efficient, but I found myself being effective. That inevitably I would crawl up there and I would literally crawl the stairs and drag the wheelchair behind me. And the very first question I would always be asked inevitably is, how in the world did you get up here? I say, I crawled up here. This is how important this is to me and how important your vote is. And I found that regardless of where people sat on the political spectrum, even far right that they would be inclined, that really seemed to diffuse the situation. And they were willing to give me 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of their time. And I think in that period of time, I'm an effective communicator, and I found myself an ability to explain why I was doing it.
I think for me, surprises covering politics is always just how part of the culture door knocking is, right? It's not something, if you don't grow up in a particularly political family, if you've not been part of the trade, right? Door knocking, on the face of it, seems like kind of a absurd thing, right? That I'm going to knock on the door of all of these likely voters, however that list calculates. Tell me what you learn as a candidate doing that work.
You really learn exactly where people sit. You talk to enough doors and you find out on a macro level what is a consistent theme and what are the issues that people care about. So that really helps you as a legislator. And for me, I was spending almost all of my time talking to Republicans and talking to independents, just because the math doesn't work any other way. And, you know, I knew I was going to have to win over the majority of independents, and I certainly was going to have to swing over a significant portion of Republicans coming from the part of the state that I come from. And I think it's really, really important, not only for me to learn from them, because you do, this is what I care about, my schools or the border, whatever it may end up being, lack of infrastructure in the community. But then it's the most effective way for me to then relay, well, this is why I'm running and these are the things that I care about. And I mean, it's fascinating when you talk to the broad spectrum, the political, it's more like a horseshoe. And you find that oftentimes even the most extreme Republicans, which I don't think a lot of Democrats would go and knock people that would be that low on the scores. And I would want to talk to everybody. And I would find that oftentimes we would find agreement, at least on issues like healthcare or disability issues, and they may even have someone in their family that has a disability, and you can find common ground and say, you know what, I don't agree with you on everything, but I appreciate what you're doing and how hard you're working and the way you're going about this, and ultimately get their vote. It's what led to my success, undoubtedly.
I want you to name the kind of problem as you diagnose it, right? Name the thing, if you had to describe the challenge that is preventing human flourishing in the state of Iowa. If there was something that you had to if you had to name, like, well, what is at the heart of the issues that we're dealing with here, how would you explain that? What's the calculus there?
We're living through a second Gilded Age, and the American dream, which is through home ownership, is slowly drifting, not slowly, actually quite quickly dissipating. We've hollowed out the center, the lack of manufacturing jobs, the lack of the middle class, the reduction of purchasing power. We have really moved into, what we were experiencing 100 years ago with the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers. But back then, we were willing to break up these monopolies, and we ended up moving towards a progressive taxation rate. I mean, like in the 1950s with the Eisenhower administration, you had an effective individual tax rate of the highest earners of 91%, and we required the large corporations to pay their fair share. And we've just seen an erosion over the years of a reduction of that, and then, like making stock buybacks legal under, Reagan, and in NAFTA with free trade. We've hollowed out the center, and we have now moved into, far quickly than what I could have imagined, into this South American model of have and have nots. And I think that is the big challenge, is the true essence of America and the American dream is really through the middle class and through working Americans. I see that being eliminated, like eroded very, very quickly. I also think what we've done with the lack of campaign finance reform and Citizens United, and the ability to essentially, like what we saw in the most recent election, of somebody like Elon Musk be able to have outsized influence with here's $350 million of, it's unfair. The system is unfair, and the little guy is being left out, and inevitably the people that are affected the most are the most vulnerable, and that's the individuals that have to be on Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, and it's the elderly, it's the poor, it's the homeless, it's the disabled, and I don't see a whole lot of voices for them, and certainly not here in this state right now. I see a whole lot of individuals in federal office and in this state that are looking out for the donor class and for the billionaires. And if we don't address that very, very quickly, I think we're going to lose the American dream, and we're going to lose what has been the essence of America.
You mentioned camping finance reform
Yeah.
as being something that's really important to you.
We need to move back to what we did 100 years ago, where we were willing to break up monopolies.
That's where
And antitrust, yeah, absolutely. That's one place to start. Second would be, some of it would be with the Supreme Court, but it would be overturning Citizens United and actually having a fair and just playing field where you can't have a handful of individuals essentially just buying and hijacking the process. I think having a fair taxation policy where right now you have the abilities for the richest Americans right now to basically just circumvent taxes, and whether they put it into trust or it's unbelievable to me that we live in a system as well where you're going to tax investment at only a third of what basically you tax labor. That is just fundamentally wrong. And so you've got all these individuals that are living off of they're able to borrow against their stocks and basically pay nothing. I mean, it's like there's a reason why Buffett, someone from my neck of the woods, has put this out of, here's $1 million if you can prove to any CEO in America that is paying a higher effective tax rate than their secretary. And it is just fundamentally wrong that the burden is being shifted more and more and more to the poorest. And even in this state, you see it. We move to a flat tax, and yet, so what do? We shift the burden to property tax, and we shift it to sales tax, which is the most regressive form of taxation. So you're carrying more and more of the burden from the poorest, and yet the highest earners, they're paying effective tax rates of 1%, 2%, or or nothing, as they're not being taxed on their stocks that they're buying against. We've got to address that issue, or we lose America. And maybe an area that I care about even more so is healthcare. Is somebody that is disabled and has lived through this, like you said, 21 surgeries by the age of 12. I had basically every single one of those surgeries at Shriners Hospital for free because it was the only way that my family could afford it. And the fact of the matter is, we live right now in basically the only westernized country that doesn't have some form of single payer health care. And right now we have a system where we pay 3 to 4 times more than every other country on earth, and yet we get by far the worst outcomes. And we need to regulate pharmaceutical industries. We need to make sure that to me, it is a fundamental human right to have affordable health care. I absolutely believe that.
One of the challenges being this far out is it's kind of hard to know how large the field might be come the primary in June 2026. How are you setting yourself apart, right, in the kind of the field that has emerged so far? How are you thinking about the extent to which your thesis is different from the kind of next person that might be running to unseat Joni Ernst?
I'm not necessarily really thinking about the others. In truth, the thing that I care about is that we put the very best candidate forward to ultimately be able to take on Joni Ernst. That in this state, which is a purple state, and for 30 years we had somebody like Senator Harkin, to have absolutely no representation at the federal level, and to have for 30 years we had balance in this state of Grassley and Harkin, because we're a purple state. That to me is the most important. It doesn't have to be me. I want us to go and go forth, and between the ideas, who is the best candidate to ultimately take that on? And what do I think the distinction is? All I can be is who I am. I'm not going to masquerade to be something that I'm not. I think that my story of overcoming a significant amount of struggle and adversity, growing up very working class, not close to poor, the fact of overcoming a lot with my disabilities, of through hard work being able to achieve a lot with adaptive sports, being able to represent my country, win gold medals, and then in very adverse conditions be able to go on and win an election, and then go from winning from 6 votes to essentially 6% in the most red district. It shows that I have a story or an ability to move the needle. I think that that's very important, and I've lived this. I've worked basically my whole entire adult life with adaptive sports, but with nonprofits, making sure that kids have access to healthcare or to adaptive sports, and also in the for-profit arena, assessing and providing wheelchairs. Like, I have put my money where my mouth is, the same as the legislator. All the policies that I put forth have been on, let's improve infrastructure, let's have jobs that pay a reasonable wage, economic prairie populism, healthcare. These are the things that I think people care about, and that's the distinction. I think Iowans at their essence, what they want is, even if they don't agree with you 100% politically, they want somebody that is genuine, that is authentic, that absolutely practices what they preach and believe it to their core, and that is me, and somebody that is hard work. And I know that there's a lot of people struggling in this state and in this country, and I think that my message of hope and optimism of what we can ultimately be and what we can achieve, I think speaks to them. I overcame a lot of struggle. When people talk about, I can't afford a house, or I can't put food on the table, or my small business is struggling, I understand that. I felt that as a kid. This is the reason why I'm doing it. I'm not doing this because I want the power, the prestige, or the money. I'm doing this because I fundamentally believe that the Senate is still the greatest vehicle that exists to make fundamental change in the society. And I'm living proof of what that can be like with what Senator Harkin did with the American with Disabilities Act. And we need individuals, candidates, and representatives that are doing this not for the power, but because they care about the people and they care about their country, and a patriotic duty.
I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about why this race and why go after US Senator Joni Ernst, right? Joni Ernst has had a long career in the Senate, and we can talk about the merits or demerits of that career, but I want to hear from you why this is the seat you've chosen to go after, why this is the candidate that you've decided to try to unseat.
Well, I haven't decided completely.
Okay,
But
important note, right?
sure.
And maybe
I haven't
explain a
decided.
little bit about that. What are you thinking about? What does the kind of calculus look like for that?
Well, the stakes can't be higher. I mean, we're a state and a country in crisis, and I think that anyone that just immediately assumes that they're the very best candidate for this and is not giving this their due diligence is being glib. And so I think you really need to take the time and be introspective of, this would be, and this is somebody that, overcame a lot, and I've been able to achieve a lot with winning a gold medal. So I understand what it takes of an individual to have a singular task. This would be, if I decided to run for Senate, this would be by far the greatest challenge that I ever endeavored into. And the stakes would be absolutely the highest of, you're talking about one of the 100 individuals on a 6-year term that have by far the most power and influence to be able to fundamentally alter the state and the country. I mean, that's one of the beauties of running. You ask why I would consider the Senate. I can sit here as a state legislator and I can have the ability to influence policy for 3.2 million Iowans. And that is great, and that's amazing. It is very meaningful work of what I'm doing, and I don't want to diminish that. However, the things that I care the most about, healthcare, infrastructure, jobs, the minimum wage, the middle class, I can try to take care of the 1% of the population, which is Iowa's population basically, or the nearly 350 million Americans, and try to influence policy there and help all those. And given the fact that America is still essentially the world's hegemon, you can influence the entire world. That's an amazing opportunity. But because of that, the stakes are so large, you really, everyone needs to be introspective about this and take your time, and not just out of ego or narcissism or whatever it may be and say, hey, I'm the best guy for it. You need to make sure that you are ready to dedicate every single ounce of who you are, mentally, spiritually, to be able to dedicate 18 months of this, because we have to win. I mean, this is so important. We are a country at crisis.
I want to end this. I wonder if you'll talk a little bit about one policy, one idea, something that you're finding a lot of meaning in, something that if you are successful in a bid, something that you could end your career having solved a problem, that would end. You would kind of add that kind of finale, that sense that you've done kind of what you set out to do. Is there a particular policy?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate that with my career with basketball, I was able to play basketball on every continent on Earth besides Antarctica.
Are you still working on Antarctica?
No, I'm done with basketball.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't play. No, my very last game, I wanted it to be meaningful. I knew I wanted to have a successful Part B. So the very last time that I got in my basketball chair and I shot a ball was when I won the gold medal. You got to die 2 deaths as an athlete. I wanted it to be the most important. I said gold medal around my neck, USA across my chest, stars and stripes around the shoulders. That was the perfect sign off. So that was the end. But because of what basketball provided me with being able to travel around the world, I've been able to see the good and the bad of infrastructure and state policies. Like I've been in Northern Africa or in in South America or Central America, the Caribbean, where there really is no infrastructure for or healthcare opportunities for individuals with disabilities. I've also been fortunate enough to live in countries like France and like Spain, Italy, where you have a single payer healthcare system, and seeing the difference that that makes in individuals' lives, particularly individuals with disabilities with complex needs. It's unbelievable the difference that that ends up making. Additionally, in like an entrepreneurship of the flexibility and ease that that gives individuals. So if you were to say, what would be the greatest achievement I think that I could make, I think it would be to make sure that 350 million Americans no longer have to make sure that they win the genetic lottery and not have cancer or some of these other individuals, that they're going bankrupt from this, and that we have healthcare as a human right, and that the people are taken care of. I really do. I believe that would be a life worth lived. And I know from firsthand experience, having lived in a situation, being surrounded by individuals that have not won the genetic lottery, and the difficulty that they have working in this state. And I've worked a lot on Medicaid reform and the unnecessary barriers to the disabled, to the elderly. And it's just frankly, it's unjust, and it's heartbreaking. It's one of the reasons why I jumped into this race to begin with. The reason why I ran as a legislator is because I was working with individuals with muscular dystrophy and ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, debilitating conditions that ultimately can lead to death in a very short period of time. And because of when we privatized our Medicaid here in Iowa, we were showing where I was working, and Rob Sand was mimicking that, almost 1,000% increase in denial and delay rate. That is just fundamentally wrong, and it affects the most vulnerable. So if I could do one thing in my life, it would be to increase access and affordability for healthcare for every single American, and not just it be, are you wealthy? Do you have a good job? Then you're provided decent healthcare.
And would a single payer system be something that you're amenable to?
I think there's
I think the policy.
What's beautiful is we've got a lot of different ways that we could do it. I look at the German model where you've got like a basic level in place, and then when you're employed, it allows you to arrive higher. But I think that there's a way that we can do it where we don't completely erode the system that we have in place with insurance. But yes, I think that some form of Medicare for all, basic coverage that we essentially have with like the VA, I think that's a basic human right. I think it's only fair and just. We are the only, they say all the time, we can't do that here in America, yet we are the only westernized country at this point that doesn't do it. And it is fundamentally wrong to me. All these decisions that we're making of, do we have homeless on the streets or do we provide healthcare? These are just decisions that we make. We're the richest, most powerful country on the earth. We spend all this money in all of these arenas and military industrial complex and this and that and tax breaks for the richest and the wealthiest, and yet we don't take care of our citizens, and it's just fundamentally wrong. We need representatives to go out there and fight for the people.
Josh Turek is a state representative representing the Council Bluffs area. He is considering a run for the Democratic nomination to take on US Senator Joni Ernst in 2026. Representative Josh Turek, thanks for joining me. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Zach,
Amy.
Avery.
what'd y'all think of Josh?
I thought he had some good ideas again about, and we already talked about sort of the healthcare piece of it. Obviously, they're both from Western Iowa, him and JD, so like they both sort of know that that's a top issue, especially in rural Western Iowa. But also talking about taxation. You know, the way that we're trying to tax corporate at such a lower level and putting that tax burden back onto sales tax, which is going to affect people with less money. These taxes seem like they're flat taxes or like they're across the board, everybody's paying the same rate. But in practice, it means that people like you and me are going to be paying a much higher tax. And we're going to be paying it on goods and services at a higher rate compared to our income than rich people and corporations. So we're basically just transferring more money to the wealthy, and people are going to start noticing that if they aren't already.
Yeah, the way I've always explained that is, if I make $10,000 and you make $100,000, a grocery bill for $100 that has a tax for 10% on that, that 10% of grocery bill is going to go take a lot more of my income than it's going to take from the next person's income that makes them that much more than me, right?
Yeah.
Avery, what do you think of Josh?
I think the conversation about like shifting tax burdens is a really important one because like I mean on their face like yeah paying taxes sucks like it takes so much out of your like I look at my paycheck and I'm like damn why am I paying this much when I know that there are people who make a lot more than me that are definitely not doing that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to have the conversation about shifting tax burdens because like when hearing a tax cut sounds great but the knowing that it doesn't just like go away like you pay taxes in order to like have good roads and big schools and good public infrastructure like it's money that's supposed to circle back to you
Exactly.
in a multitude of ways other than just like public infrastructure and stuff like that. But I think it's important to have those conversations because I mean it all connects to why we're the only like he calls it the westernized country, why we're one of the only westernized countries without like any form of like single payer health insurance or like why we're one of the only like rich countries that doesn't have like well developed and well established like public infrastructure like other nations do. And a lot of that can be due to like our size because we are very big geographically, but like it doesn't mean that that's not things that will work for us if we just kind of are aware of how our money is being spent by our government. And so I like that he is having that conversation.
That's right. On to the next interview.
Last one.
This hour, we've put our eyes on 2026 and the challengers going after US Senator Joni Ernst, but not all the names are out. When this episode drops Wednesday morning, a new name, one you may not have heard of, will have added itself to the list. Knoxville's Nathan Sage is a veteran who runs the Chamber of Commerce in Knoxville. And it's hard for me to ignore that his work also intersects for a radio station as the director at KNIA, KRLS Radio in Indianola. He joins a growing field of Democrats looking to challenge Senator Joni Ernst in 2026. Hello, Nathan.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. I was thinking about it, and TV broadcasters, I'm thinking like Representative Ashley Hinson, keep finding their way into Iowa politics, but folks like us from radio don't seem to have the same kind of backing. Is a face for radio a liability?
I think so. I think it's held me back a long time.
I worry we'll never see the end of it. This is the first joke anybody makes when they find out you work in radio.
Yes, all the time.
I wanted to kind of get us started by beginning with being with a problem, to name the problem. How do you explain what's going wrong here in Iowa, and where can Iowans feel it?
I think coming from a working class background, I think Iowa, we just found out, is the second leading state in the country for cancer, right? Both my parents died of cancer.
Both
of them. My dad when he was 54, my mom when she was 67. And I think that's a good starting point to understand that what corporations have kind of done and rich people, rich billionaires have done to our state, where it seems like they're taking our resources and giving us nothing but disease and cancer back. And I think the working class is working as hard as they can to make something of themselves, but it seems like we're not getting anywhere. And it seems like every day seems to be a challenge. I think, cost of living, it seems to go up. Groceries are still expensive, and people are trying to find ways to survive. And I want to work on making them thrive.
Talk a little bit about cancer rates. I mean, if that's an important piece for you, that's a unified piece for you. We've all seen how those rates have gone through the roof. I think Iowa was one of two states where Iowa cancer rates are on the rise. Obviously, everyone knows someone who has experienced cancer, your parents. How is that a political question, right? How is that a state question? How is that walk me through that?
Well, one thing, Iowa, we don't have the best quality water. right? And so you got to ask your questions as to what's going, what are we drinking, what are we eating, what is going through the air, what are we dealing with. And I think from a working class background, it's harder to ask those questions because you don't have other options. As a working class background, you're like, I got to drink the water I'm given and try and survive and have the food that I'm given. So you can't necessarily make changes like other people can, and so you're doing all you can to eat and have the things that you can have that are affordable, right? And I think that causes a lot of it. I think the foods we're ingesting, the air we're breathing, and the water quality in Iowa isn't the best. And I think that's something that we need to look into and figure out what we can do better there, because obviously we're an egg state, and we have big egg, and we have farmers, and we have farm runoff, and it's okay, what can we do to minimize the problems that are causing cancers or causing issues? And I think that is something we definitely need to look at more of, and I think that has a correlation to all the cancer that we're seeing.
Talking a little bit about your experience with the chamber, small towns across Iowa are facing real challenges. Based on your work with the chamber, what is it that Congress should be doing to support these small towns? And maybe you've seen some examples with your work there.
Well, I think right now, one of the biggest issues that we're seeing just right now is, the unknown of tariffs, right? Like, we don't know exactly. I've talked to a lot of small business owners lately that feel like the light switch on and off that's been going on with the tariffs, they're in that wait and see mode. So when it comes to purchasing goods, when it comes to building buildings and trying to do more as a small business, you got to be 5-10 years budgeting, planning that out. And it causes problems when you're trying to figure out what you can do going forward for those small businesses. So I think a lot of the time when you see the cost rising on the small business at the small business level, and they're trying to make ends meet, corporations don't have to match that. So you can, like, we're trying to tell everybody, shop local, be local, buy local, and it's harder for working class to do that. It's easier for somebody to go to a big corporation and go to Amazon and Walmart. So that's where I think the issues are causing with the small businesses, where they just can't compete on the same level as those major corporations. And you're going to see a lot of these small businesses trying to, and that's what I've been doing for a long time, even when I was in radio, is working with these businesses, hearing their sob stories, and we're just trying to make ends meet. We're just trying to keep the lights on. My wife works for a small business in Indianola, and they're tapped out. They're doing all they can to make sure the prices are attainable for people to have their products, but at the same time, they got to pay for everything, and it comes more and more difficult. And that business has been in Indianola since 1885, so they know, they've seen a thing or two, and it just progressively seems to be getting worse for small businesses.
Can you, because when you talk about tariffs, right, the on and off switch, right, it's, what that is a level of unpredictability, right? It's a level of, and particularly in the ag industry, something the podcast was focused on in the previous episode was the extent to which that unpredictability impacts a business's ability to make a decision, make a long-term decision. We've been focused on the ag sector. Maybe say a little bit more about how that can affect decision making for an entrepreneur or a small business.
Yeah, so a lot of times when businesses are looking for supplies and looking for specific supplies, and you know that the supplier is going to up the cost, you automatically kind of look to a different supplier. You look to the other options. So it also delays their processing on top of trying to match the price. Last thing I think a lot of small business owners, especially in Knoxville, want to do is increase costs for their consumer. I think at the end of the day, they want to make their cost equal to what the corporations can do, because they know that's what people want, and they're trying to already provide the goods and the services that these other corporations can provide. It just makes it harder for them to compete. So I think that's the biggest issue with the on again, off again, is, again, we talk about it's a delayed response, and they're trying to stay on top of the game. And when you do that on and off and cause that delay, it just causes more pain for those small business owners.
Yeah. This hour we've been speaking to the ideas, to the peoples running for the nomination, or considering a run for the nomination to take on US Senator Joni Ernst in 2026. I wanted to hear a little bit from you about how you kind of self-conceive of setting yourself apart. What is it? How do you think of yourself in the kind of list of names, where you sit within that list?
So I think I'm by far a different Democrat than most. I feel that I am somebody that has, so little background, I grew up in a trailer park in Mason City, Iowa. Right. I was poor growing up. My dad was a factory worker. My mom was a daycare teacher. She was a daycare teacher because that was the only way we could afford daycare besides going to my grandma's house. I've seen my family grow up. I've seen them work 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, double shifts, trying to make ends meet. My dad, when I was 14 years old, came in and said, "Hey, Nathan, we can't afford birthday presents right now." So I've seen how hard it is for working class people to get by and survive. And for me, being in that, growing up in that, that sets me apart, way apart from most politicians and most people in general, is because I've been there. I've gone through the hard times. I know what it's like. I went 2 weeks feeding my daughter on $40 cash one time, because that's the only money that I had at the time to make ends meet. So I know the struggle. I know what it's like, trying to find the best opportunity to keep surviving and keep going. And luckily for me, I joined the military, and the military provided an opportunity for me to get an education and then move forward. And I was lucky in that aspect. A lot of people aren't lucky, and a lot of people can't do what I did, and so they're stuck in this routine of everyday life, just trying to survive. And so having that background and understanding what people are actually going through and what they actually need, as opposed to just talking about it, I think that sets me head and shoulders ahead of everybody when it comes to knowing what working class is going through.
Can you walk me through your decision to run as a Democrat, right? I think that particularly in Iowa, being a party that is so much out of power in our legislature, particularly, I could see someone saying, maybe it'd be better to run if maybe these ideas are better served as with an independent campaign. Tell me about the decision to run as a Democrat.
I want to give people an actual reason to join the Democratic Party, and I want somebody to fight for them. I feel like the Democratic Party does fight for a lot of people, but I think they've gotten away from really fighting for the working class and worrying more about other issues as opposed to fighting for the working class. And for me, it's like you need somebody that's willing to say the things that are needed to be said. We've seen how the Republicans have no problem saying whatever they want to say. Me, I'm a very honest, blunt person. I'm not saying I'm going to say anything crazy or wrong. I'm just going to tell people how it is. And when people are going through something, you appreciate things differently. And for me also, it's not even about necessarily me talking to people. More as I want to listen and understand what things they're going through day in and day out to make their lives better and try to survive, and understand what I can do from a federal level to work for them. And I think a lot of the times politicians on both sides tend to say I think of it as like trying to date a girl, right? When you're trying to date a girl, you're going to say the things that you want to say to date that girl. But at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. And I think people are in Iowa, and people across the country are tired of hearing people talk and say they're going to do stuff, and they want someone that's actually going to work for them and actually fight for them. And that's what I want to do. I pride myself in fighting for small businesses and working with small businesses, same way as I pride myself working for the working class. I want to fight for people that are tired of fighting.
And in order to do that fighting, you have to clear not just that primary process, but a general election against US Senator Joni Ernst, who's been in that seat for many terms. And I wanted to hear about kind of how you think you will be able to overcome what are pretty serious odds, given her name recognition, given the amount of money she will have at her disposal, given a career that, as a military veteran, that's, she has a lot of strengths going for her.
Yeah, she does have a lot. You mentioned she has a lot of money. A lot of that is corporate money, and not a lot is a billionaire backing money. And I'm different than that. I'm not going to take corporate money. And I feel like that's what working class individuals like to get representation in Washington, D.C. Washington is made up of 98% generational wealth, only 2% come from the working class. To have policies actually made and actually changed and things actually work for the working class, you need a working class candidate. I feel like she's bought and paid for, and she toes the line for what Republicans tell her to do. Obviously, by the confirmation of Pete Hegseth, I was obviously not aboard on that, and I don't agree with that. And I think it was wrong. And that's just my take on that. And I think, again, I feel like most Iowans and most Americans are sitting in this spot right now where they're in the middle, and they're just trying to figure out who is the right person that's going to actually fight for them, as opposed to just say things for them. And I think Joni has had many opportunities to stand up and fight for veterans and fight for opportunities, and it seems like she's lacking that and not doing what is better for the working class, instead of working for her corporate sponsors and her billionaires.
Bringing us to an end here, give me one policy, one idea that were you elected, something that that you would pursue that would, for you, represent a real success? Something you could bring home to Iowans and say, like, this is how I move the needle forward. What was an issue for you that you find a lot of meaning in?
Increasing pay and increasing benefits for the working class. If we can up the pay for benefits and up the pay for making healthcare a little bit more attainable, where you're not spending so much out of pocket to be able to go see the doctor, at the same time putting some more money into a paycheck. I had talked to a union worker who said, you put 50 cents more in my paycheck each paycheck, I have the opportunity to go spend that somewhere else and go on vacation or go see what Iowa has to offer, as opposed to just staying home and trying to survive. So that's where I think the starting is, and enhancing the economy from the ground up instead of this trickle down stuff we haven't seen. We've never seen actual money trickle down to the working class. It doesn't get to us. We just make ends meet.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to approach kind of how you could improve the kind of take home pay, the income for working class Iowan. But like, give me like what is the thing that would do that for you, right? Like, is there like there've been a lot of proposals floating around for like how, like, what a working class agenda might look like. Is there like a particular policy that would help get you to that point?
On policy, I'm not going to comment specifically on that. What I will say is, when it comes to making policy, when it comes to farm and working class policy, what we plan to do is bring working class individuals to the table to understand what exactly union members, what exactly they need to have for them to make their lives better. And once we like I told you, I'm not about talking, I'm about listening. So what I want to do is listen to all those people and understand what they need and what we can do at a federal level to make their lives better.
Yeah, I just to drill in there though. I mean, like, what? Give me. You want to see what would move the needle on improving the take home pay for a working class person that Congress could do?
I think when you talk about, I'm not saying healthcare, when it makes healthcare a little bit easier, universal healthcare for all, I think that's an option we could look into. I think also, when it comes to minimum wage, start with there and understanding where we are and where we need to be. And I think they're far between each other, and I think that's a starting point where we'd like to look at. But again, I'm not the expert on it. What I'll do is listen to the people in the room and then listen to the unions, listen to the working class, and understand what exactly we need to do from their standpoint to make their life better now. Not 5 years, not 10 years, right now.
Nathan Sage is a Democrat running in 2026, hoping to secure the Democratic nomination to take on Joni Ernst for her US Senate seat. Nathan Sage, thanks for joining me, man.
It was a pleasure.
Zachary,
Amy.
Avery.
so what do you guys think of Nathan Sage?
Raise the minimum wage.
Raise the minimum wage. Raise the minimum wage. Let's go.
Yeah, it really needs to be raised because Iowa will never raise it. Most of the states that have a federal minimum that refuse to raise it will never raise it. So you have to do it at the federal level. And it has to probably at least be $15 an hour, honestly. So, I mean, if you can do that at the federal level, you're going to immediately impact millions. That's a great policy. And also like universal health care, which the other candidates have been talking about too.
I think that opens up a lot of so I'm at the age where a lot of my friends are like starting to kind of shift. Like we had our jobs right out of college, and people are starting to kind of shop around the job market and shift around and look for changes and stuff. And it's so bad right now. It's so bad. And I think a lot about how like all of those kinds of policies, raising the minimum wage, just improving the systems and infrastructure for working class people is like what would help that. Like if I was able to live off of, maybe getting a job as a bartender for a little bit if I was in between jobs, like that would be so helpful. It would help people be so much more mobile. Like he said, if you have more money in your paycheck, you're able to put more money into other things in the economy, supporting local businesses, even going to, your local Walmart and like spending money there. Like I like that he made a lot of those connections.
Yeah, which is why Republicans in Iowa hate universal basic income pilots, because it literally proves that if you give people more money, they will spend it and increase everyone's economic. A rising tide lifts all boats. A trickle down does nothing.
Doesn't do anything. And it proves that like that's how like we can do that. I feel like one of the arguments is that you can't. decrease the value of the dollar or whatever, like, you know, whatever that even means. But doing stuff like that, raising the minimum wage, doing UBI programs, like it proves that we have the ability to do things like that. We have the ability to provide these systems and this infrastructure for people, and like it's a choice that it's not happening.
That we have the resources that we could be investing in our people instead of subsidizing maybe industries that leave a lot of Iowans out of the economy.
Exactly. Absolutely.
The thing that I really appreciated about Sage's interview was, I mean, I think the lack of polish. I think if you listen to the interviews that preceded this one, you know, these are folks that are in the Iowa legislature. They've run campaigns. They've knocked on doors.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I think to some extent, there is some excitement that I have in hearing someone who doesn't have the same level of polish that the next person. I think we need to make room for lots of different kinds of people to run in this state. And even in that answer where, you know, he's like, clearly some campaign person has advised him not to comment on policy yet. I mean, even, you know, he didn't have enough polish to where it prevented him from talking about stuff that he was interested in. That was another episode of Cornhole Champions. If you like the show, please rate it and subscribe. Share it with your friends. While you're at it, sign up for my newsletter at cornholechampions.substack.com and get these episodes straight to your inbox when they drop Wednesday mornings. Cornhole Champions is a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line, where we... this is good. Powered by Iowa Starting Line. The podcast is produced by me with music from Avery Mossman. Cornhole Champions is a proud member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. We'll see you with a new episode next Wednesday. Until then, I'm Zachary Oren Smith.
I'm Amy Rivers.
And I'm Avery Staker.
Thanks for listening. Zachary.
No, Jane.
Hey, Amy.
Avery.
Zach.
Amy.
Avery.
Zach.
Amy.
Zach.
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 This is actually what plays in my head. It's just me and other people saying my name. I don't actually listen to anything anybody says. Zach. Zach.
Zach.
We all have to
Zach.
say as if a name that isn't ours.
Avery.
Amy. Wait.
That was crazy.
You almost made Avery explode. Avery was like, what name do I say?
Crazy.
Zach.
Amy.
Get that and get
Why do we do this? What is the purpose?
It's to introduce your voice. If you're listening to the audio, you won't know their voice.
You left it in the podcast last time.
Zach.
It sounded weird.
It didn't sound
Amy.
weird. Zach.
Amy.
Zach.
Amy.
Zach.
Amy.
Zach.
Amy.
Zach.
Amy.
No, this is Patrick.